Hello, everybody. So, Klara Glosova is a Czech-born visual artist, and she is based out of Seattle these days. She is a multidisciplinary artist who combines art forms and ideas in many different ways, working primarily in drawing, painting, and printmaking. But more recently, Klara has also created some mind-bending ceramics, which I'm sure we're going to see. They draw inspiration from the things that we use in our everyday life, like socks and pennies and headphones and iPads. It's brilliant. And she turns the commonplace into whimsical, which you guys will definitely be seeing. Her work is autobiographical and draws inspiration from her dreams as well as daily life. And she elevates the mundane into extraordinary in a really subtle way. You could mistake some of her ceramic pieces for scattered laundry. She's also the founder of NEPO House, which was a series of collective art shows held out of her own personal home in Seattle, which I hear were quite the party. She likes to invite the outside in, the inside out, and see what happens when you do things backwards. The Rack Collective says that the reason to continue to be an artist lies in an everyday rediscovery of what remains to be said or done. Klara's work invites the audience to rediscover the ordinary and see the wonder in that everyday. Without any further ado, please welcome Klara Glosova.
Thank you for the great introduction. That was perfect. Let me turn my things in. Okay, I guess I should stay near the mic. Thank you for inviting me to Evergreen this afternoon. The title of my talk is Dirty Socks and Dreams. And I had kind of hard time deciding whether or not to start with the dirty laundry or my dreams, but I decided that I'll be a responsible adult. You know, don't eat your ice cream first before dinner. So I'll start here with the dirty laundry. So I guess I usually ask the audience, like, what do you think they're looking at? But I think my secret has been already given out. So you can, this is a ceramic underwear that I made. And I'm gonna show you some of my own work, and I'm gonna go back to about 2011. And at that point, can you tell which one is my kid? I was raising two soccer players that they were aspiring to play for Arsenal and Barcelona. Those dreams have changed since then, thank goodness. But I have spent huge amounts of time on my own time on the sidelines of soccer games, and that just kind of brought me into a world that was unfamiliar to me, and I got to do work that I would never expected to do. Anyway, I'll get to it, but it kind of started with the laundry and the tube socks. I don't know how many of you are soccer players or there. So there's a lot of those around. These are made out of porcelain. And I made them and I put them in a show in 2000, I think it was 2011 at the Czech-born Gallery in Seattle. And I figured the only way I could display socks would be on a ground because, you know, you can imagine on a pedestal it would make zero sense. So, yeah, they were just, this is a studio shot, but they were just placed like this on the ground. And then, you know, the curators and people running the gallery realized there's going to be a problem on the opening day. So we created like there was a rope and a barrier and 2 attendants on each side of this installation of socks, and still people kept walking straight through and over these ceramic pieces. And they kept breaking, and I would come in and with a glue, super glue, and just keep gluing them back together, those pieces. And it was kind of an interesting for me, it was very, like, on one hand, it was frustrating, but I was like, okay, it's just, it's dirt, it's ceramics, it's okay, so I can glue it together, it'll be fine. And then the other part that was kind of more difficult is to deal with the people that felt bad about stepping on these socks, because then they wrote me letters, and they were really nice letters and apologizing, but then I felt like I also have to take care of those people and make them feel better. So there was a lot of maintenance, let's say, about this ceramic work. And so I was kind of like, I just can't deal, like you reach a point where you're like, okay, this is just going too far. So I had to make myself feel better and decide that it's completely okay if people walk over my work. And I made this welcome mat also out of porcelain. And it was set outside during one of the NEPO House events, and it was meant to be walked over. So this is how it looked at the end of the event. I am not going to show slides from the NEPO House, but if you guys have questions, I ran basically a project space gallery in my own home for 6 years, and it's called NEPO House. So during the Q&A, we can get to it, and I can talk about that a little more if you have questions about how an artist will run a gallery and what that entails. Anyway, I'm going to come back to the soccer fields and how these pieces came about. So these are about, I believe this is about 6 or 8 foot long watercolor. And one thing that this work followed my foray into ceramics, and one of the reasons I came back to working on paper was because I realized, like, wow, all my ceramic pieces are so flat. I'm pretty much making my own paper, and this paper doesn't shatter when you step on it. So I came full circle back to drawing, which I originally started in. And the way this work came about was from a realization. So I spent a lot of time as a parent on the sidelines, as I mentioned before, and it's kind of a mixed bag of feelings because A, I love my kids and I want to support them. B, I'm not just great soccer fan, and C, there's so many hours, like every weekend, couple games at least, and standing there on the sidelines. And you know what? I'm an artist, and this is not how I imagined spending my lifetime. I just thought I'll be in my studio sometimes. So out of this frustration came this body of work. I read in a magazine somewhere this phrase that was actually coming from somebody who was in prison, that he realized at some point that he needs to be the best prisoner you can be. And I was like, wow, okay, that speaks to me. How can I take it to heart? And that kind of provided a change of perspective. And literally all it took is I took a few steps back behind the line. I was one of those parents standing there, and I started looking at what am I part of, and at the people that I am part of, but nobody else is looking at them. The focus is completely somewhere else. It's on the players, it's on the game, but there's a whole slew of support, people that are there to support their kids, and nobody is paying any attention. And that just became really interesting to me. And so I started taking pictures I stepped back and I started taking pictures on the sidelines. And that led to an led to a show, and also interesting situation within the soccer team parents, because when there's a parent with a camera, the other parents assume that you'll share pictures, and I kind of had to break it to them that if there's any kids on those pictures, sure, I'll be happy to, but otherwise do not have much expectation of the documentation of the game from me. Because on my pictures, I left the players out. So there's no players, no score, no ball. So what I did is, this was a show that was at Brian Ono's gallery, and I created a series of watercolor images. And my idea, they're the same. Basically, all you see is parents just standing on the sidelines, and the difference between the individual pieces is just like one parent shifting their foot from one to another, and that's kind of it. There's not much happening. And what I wanted to create in the gallery is kind of the feeling of being, it's kind of I thought of it like a cinema, like just frames in a film, like barely anything happens within few minutes, and the viewer is kind of in the middle of that movie. So that was my idea. And then for that show, I also created, how sports teams have bobbleheads. So I figure like the parents never get any bobbleheads. It's all the athletes, all the players. So I created ceramic team parent, little figurines. There's I believe it's 11 characters, just like in any soccer team. Oh, there's some other view of that. And then there's some more. This is a close-up of one large watercolor piece. So this one was about 10 foot long. As you can see, the work is actually done on 18 by 24 watercolor paper, and it's just a pad of paper. And really I used kids' pencils colored pencils to make the drawing, and then anything watercolor or some inks and acrylics, whatever I had. So at that time I was telling people I'm dabbling in watercolor, and actually it was super physical. So working on anything that's 10 foot long was, it's a physical work, but it was that's not what people imagine when you say you're working in watercolor. So this piece was acquired as part of a great project called Deed of Gift by Seattle Art Museum, and that was a gift by Jennifer Nemhauser and Matthew Offenbacher. Matthew Offenbacher is a great artist, visual artist, also working and living in Seattle, and he won the NEPO Award, which I don't know if you guys know, it's like the biggest painting award, and he decided to do this great thing. He took the money and went to Seattle Art Museum and said, I'd like to purchase artwork that will basically help to build your collection of women artists and just underrepresented artists. So it took several years. The project was developed, and then this was one of the works that was acquired by the museum for that collection, thanks to this great gesture, which was you guys look it up for sure, because it's like such a great example of artists being both extremely generous and critical of an institutional practices. The way it came about is that there was a all-women show that was traveling from France, Centre Pompidou, that was shown at Seattle Art Museum, and Art Museum at that time wanted to do a parallel exhibition of women artists from their own collection, and they couldn't do it because they didn't have any, or they had so few that they couldn't make a really comprehensive show out of that. So anyway, that's kind of detour, but yeah. So there's some more of these watercolors. And I worked in a circular way that it's not always, I work on one project and then simultaneously I develop other ideas, and then often if there's still something that I'm really curious about, I come back to that idea and develop it further, but often that's a span of several years between, and it's not the only thing I'm working on. So this was a few years later, I don't remember the years exactly, but I started coming back to the sideline images, but singling out individual people. And I didn't really know where this is going. These are monoprints. So do you guys know what monoprint is? It's just basically, I don't know, do you have printmaking? You do? Okay, so yeah, monoprints. I don't need to explain the technique, but it's like a painting on a piece of plexiglass. And they're small. These ones are small. So what started to happen is that I was making these prints of just individuals, and I realized that what I was really interested in when I was picking out these individuals from the lineup of parents was that they were wearing blankets. Like, it wasn't obvious to me first, but then I was like, oh yeah, they're all wearing blankets. And that became another level of curiosity for me, because it's, again, another kind of moment when you realize, well, you don't go in public wearing a blanket when you think that somebody's going to ever look at you, right? So this was another kind of way of seeing maybe more into the people's lives that when they're not expected to be visible. So this was a show of, these are almost life-size paintings, and I made them, this was at Oxbow, I believe it was 2017, 18, maybe 18, yeah. And they are acrylic on canvas. There's some more from that show. And this one, so I was making these paintings, and actually until they were on a show, I didn't know that, like, I knew this was a Disney blanket, but I'm not up on the Disney films much, so I didn't know which one or what. And then one parent came to me and she said, oh, my daughter, she loves Frozen. I'm like, oh, okay, I get it now. It says Frozen and it's perfect. So there's another, that's another aspect I was really interested in, is that, like, what do people have to, like, it shows the extent to which they have to, these parents have to take care of themselves to survive these games. And then there's another from the series. They kind of started changing a bit. This one is called Oceanic Feeling, and although it's still set on a soccer field, I was thinking about a kind of more universal feeling, which universal, I mean, the way I mean the word is in terms of, like, universal tool that fits many different things. So this kind of quiet moment of somebody sitting and just thinking, and you don't know, quiet, pensive moment, I guess nothing is happening. And just something that I feel like whether or not you've been ever on a soccer field, you can relate, that people can relate to these quiet moments. So that was shown, those works were shown at Linda Hodges Gallery about a couple years ago. And speaking of oceanic feeling, I'll switch gear now to another body of work that came right after the soccer field paintings. These are from a very different realm. They are inspired by the Ama divers in Japan. There are series of of monotype prints. The way they happen to emerge is I've been kind of always fascinated by water and have just love it. Love swimming, everything, but I'm not a diver. But every fall for the last several years, I would start drawing divers. And many years I just do one drawing or two and then just give it up because my reasoning was like, oh yeah, I've been looking and reading about the ama divers, but that's Japanese tradition. It's not my own. I'm not diver. What am I doing with this material? And then eventually last fall, I just gave in and I realized that there was something in it for me that I needed to discover through the work, and I never would come up with it beforehand. So a little bit about the ama divers. It's a almost 2,000-year-old tradition. Most of them are women divers that dive for pearls, and they dive in frigid waters without any oxygen tank. And I was just fascinated by their resilience and bravery and their being self-sufficient, and admired them as women. So I finally dove in, and I'll just walk you through this series of prints, or swim you through it, I should say. Another thing, as I was working through them, they emerged one print at a time. I didn't have a preconceived idea that it's going to be a series. I was reminded of a poem by Adrienne Rich called Diving into the Wreck. So I'll read you just the beginning paragraph of that poem. First, having read the book of myth and loaded the camera and checked the edge of the knife blade, I put on the body armor of black rubber, the absurd flippers, the grave and awkward mask. I'm having to do this not like Cousteau with his assiduous team aboard the sun-flooded schooner, but here alone. And I realized that this is something that this work might lead me to my own personal space that is unknown. It's going into the unconscious, and I might find ways or encounter things that are scary, frightening to me. And so I went in anyway. And the story developed as I was working through these prints. Okay, so I'll go through the images pretty quickly. So it was kind of circling down and down into the unknown. And it got a little bit scary and sad on the bottom. Wow. Right timing, huh? So there was a point making this work that I felt like, okay, I need to come up for air. Like that was getting intense. And I'm talking metaphorically, right? I wasn't really diving, but I was encountering some of my own emotional stuff. And so they came up. And as you can see, since they reached the land, they had to get boots. This is a studio shot of the series. Looks kind of compressed now. Huh. But anyway, so this is kind of my idea is to, they haven't been shown yet, these works, and to show them as a kind of overall aquatic environment. And then the story continued. They came on land. And just a little bit about printmaking and monotypes. I love I usually draw and paint, but I always come back to printmaking for one reason, and that is that it lets me to try a lot of different ideas pretty quickly, and I can discover ways to express something that I would never think of beforehand, because I can change the colors, and I can work on the same image and do multiple versions and variations much faster than I would in a painting. So it's a really great tool for artists if you can take printmaking classes. So you can see how very different. I mean, I'm showing you only some of them. The series ended up over 120 prints. So there's a lot of different ways and variations these images developed. Yeah, so this was kind of dealing with, and again, these are stories in my head that just kind of happened as I was working on it. Something happened on land. And there are people trying to fix things. I could do I don't want to do a lot of talking. I feel like I don't need to explain these images. I don't want to. That's also good to know when you are a practicing artist, that is your choice with how much you want to share. I have my own stories, and I'm sharing some of those here with you, and I might not with another audience, but also I can decide how much of it I feel is important to go with the visual images, which are the most important thing for me that I'm putting out there. So, and then we encounter the group of anthropologists, and anthropologists are looking at us. They are facing us, and there's something, you can only deduct that there's something going on. There's something not so well on Earth. They're all women anthropologists. And so you can see this is another studio shot, and that you see the variations on that in print, and that led me to go back into painting. And that's a painting that came out of that series. That one is, 8 feet by something. And then, so anyway, I came out, it's a cyclical kind of nature for me. I work through material till it kind of runs its course, and then it usually leads me to a new beginning somewhere. And the new beginning was, I didn't really know, I often don't know how that relates to the previous work, but I realized that here the beasts come in, and they're the unlikely treasure that I have found on the bottom of the ocean, and that's the kind of things that always been inside me, but I've been circling around. And this particular beast, this image, is based on Mabel Stark. It's called Ex-Lion Tamer. But Mabel Stark was fearless tiger trainer, and she was training tigers in like 20s and 30s, and she completely fell in love with the animals. She was known to say that there's a difference between training and taming, and she really respected and loved the beasts. She also was willing to face the risks working with these animals, so she had over 700 stitches. She almost died from wounds, from bites and scratches, and eventually, actually, once she could no longer work with tigers, she took her own life. So there was a story that just really was fascinating and touched me deeply, that somebody can be so passionate about someone to just live on the edge and give everything for that. So this is kind of more recent series of dry points. And so about these dry points. So they came from another practice that I have had for a very long time, over 20 years, maybe 25, close to 30 years. I've been drawing my dreams. It's been my way of kind of keep making artwork. It got me through the hardest times. It got me through times when I had no time whatsoever and I thought I'm done and I'm never gonna be an artist. When I had 2 little kids and it just wasn't happening. So I would still keep a practice of, as soon as I wake up, having a sketchbook and drawing my dream. It would all take about 5 minutes. But over the years, I have stacks and stacks and stacks of sketchbooks that are filled with my dreams. But, you know, over time, they kind of intermingle with anything that I'm interested in. I'll record in there. The impulse to do this started with my own frustration with drawing. I thought I can't draw really well, so I needed to practice it and get better. And then my other reasoning was this, at the time it seemed really unfounded paranoia that if I lose my sight as an artist, how am I gonna make my work? It's just not gonna be possible. So I started making these drawings with my eyes closed, and I had to relearn to draw. And in a way, I had to deal with drawing in a similar way, like really sense it in a way as I would be making sculpture. Over time, my drawing, I think, has improved. And it led to, so there's again mix of kind of a mystical, imaginary, dreamy animals. Those are the latest prints. And also some things and people and animals that are really dear to me. So this is my dog, Smila. The day before she died, she was 17 and a half. And I made a drawing of her. So everything is compressed. So imagine everything is longer, okay? All the images are, I don't know. Okay, squished. So anyway, this, you know, again, I can spend time on the bottom of a sea, but ultimately there's time to come for air and join the regular daily life that I have here with my family. And that's kind of where my work always fluctuates between. And I realized, like, I really want to keep the people and the animals that are close. It's like they matter so much to me, and I need to somehow express that love for them. So there's a series of paintings that came out of that. They are really recent. Those are 2 kittens, Louis and Bowie. We got them last year, and they were kittens then, no longer. They grew into huge cats. I mean, it's like, they're like, she's 18 pounds or something, yeah. I mean, who knew? Like, you get kittens, and then the vet told me, like, oh, these will be big cats. And I'm like, how big? So there we go. Then my son Sydney, you saw him earlier. My son Blake. And this is, again, mix. It's a Chinese man with characters tattooed on his head from my dream, but it's also my partner and co-conspirator of many years, Scott. There's different versions of him. And this is my dad's horse, Belinka. And then things happen that I don't really know why they happen. I made a painting, and obviously I'm talking about recent work here. I don't always have all the stories together or figure out what they're about. And this one was really, honestly, just kind of odd piece until I made some more work. Again, I think it relates to some ambiguity about what is happening on the earth, to the earth, and what are the people doing there too. Yeah, it's open to interpretation. There's another animal, it's a bear. The only way we know that he is part of the human world, there are humans in the world, is by his collar and tag. And some of the figures in these paintings are just heading into an unknown. And I think that's kind of an analogy of my own process. Oftentimes I just head in and I don't know what I'm gonna encounter and where it's gonna lead to. I'm just hoping that through the work I learn something and it will lead me someplace, but that's all based on some kind of faith rather than knowledge. I know other artists work differently, so my process is a little more kind of, I will learn through the work of what's happening. And I'm back. So this is a piece of, the painting. I put it back into the original photo that it came from, and it's actually a photo transfer that's hanging in our kitchen. And I looked at it, oftentimes I just don't know, I feel like I'm always heading out somewhere and then none of it makes any sense. But the other day actually I looked at this piece and I was like, that looks super familiar, but familiar in a really, really like weird, deep way. And then I had to run and look up fish out one of those old dream drawings, I think from 1994. And I recorded a dream here, and I will read you that dream, but you can see the figure on the bottom, wrapped in blanket. And I realized that there are some themes in my work that unconsciously repeat over a long span of time. I'll read you the dream. In that dream, I'm going to use the word Indian for meaning Native American. I know better now, but my dream in 1994 didn't know the correct terms. So I'll read it to you. It was early in the morning, walking through the desert. I tried to go with the wolves. They were hollering loud, so I tried to sleep with them out there. I woke up after the last morning hour of sleep, refreshed, and started walking towards town with green blanket over my shoulders. The town was one main street, almost no houses, and full of locals, some of them sitting in their pickup trucks. In the middle of Main Street was an Indian teepee, with the smoke coming out of it. The air was brisk and clear right after the dawn. The Indian child passed me walking and said, "Howdy." I said, "How are you?" back to him, and walked by thinking about the wolves. So that was one of the first dreams I wrote actually in a book, and it was one of those seminal dreams that I'll never forget because I was new. I was an immigrant. I was new to America, and I lived for a few years in New York and went to art school, but then I moved out west. And this was kind of the welcome dream for me. And it just stayed with me it kind of was this moment where I realized maybe I can build my life here, and always feeling like thankful for being able to be here on this out west. I'm from Czech Republic, so it's far away from my home. I will show you, this is my latest painting. I just finished it this week, and the dog's name is Brida, but I've been thinking about the wolves. Thank you. You guys have any questions? A little time.
Thank you for this. I was looking at the backs of the spectators on the soccer field and trying to discern their emotional state. Did you do a little bit of that when you were painting the set of their shoulders, or?
I feel like I always empathize with whoever the character is I'm painting. So it's, it's hard. Some people I know and some people I don't know. It just happens, some, photo. And I think that's true for all my paintings. They're of something in particular, but I made them into a character that embodies some of my own interpretations and feelings. So yeah, I do. I try to, I think that's how I work is I wouldn't be interested in painting it unless I was really curious about them. And that curiosity maybe makes me make up some things, but it keeps me engaged in actually making the work. Yeah. Thanks.
You mentioned that you, at some point, felt like you weren't very good at drawing, and I was curious, did you go to art school kind of feeling that, and what sort of mediums did you start?
Actually, I studied drawing. I'm from Czech Republic, and I went to drawing classes since first grade, I think. So it wasn't that I haven't had enough instruction in drawing, but I think there came time when what I learned wasn't serving anymore. Like I learned some skills for sure, but I couldn't express the things. The frustration was out of I could draw a model or, like I had training, yes. And I went to New York Studio School and Hunter College and architecture school. So yeah, combined I had education. Yeah, I come for pretty traditional training in drawing, yes. But is a difference. Then it wasn't matching the things that I really felt strongly about, and I didn't know how to get there.
Thank you.
So how did you get there?
Good. Well, you kind of saw part of the journey. One was that just drawing in that sketchbook for 5 minutes a day. I got better, yeah. I mean, I got better at expressing the things that I cared about. And a lot of them, especially the ones, you saw that one that was the dream one. It was with my eyes shut. You can also see the writing, how messed up it is. Like, I wasn't looking. So I trained myself sometimes, how do you get there? Okay, so how do you get there? Sometimes boundaries are useful. So I set myself boundaries. That wasn't like I can do everything and anything, because that can be overwhelming. But I gave myself little bits of things that I could do, and that felt more doable as a practice. At the time, I did not have time to spend hours in the studio, but I knew I could do this over and over, 25 years or so. So yeah, it adds up.
You might have already said this, so I apologize if I missed it, but other than watercolors, do you use a different painting medium?
Yeah, so these are oils. The other big soccer paintings were in acrylic. So I use anything that I can grab. And and the oil paintings were also of the family, and I've been really into using those. But there was time where I couldn't use, I had small kids, so I didn't want to use turbs, which actually all the medias got better. Gamsol is way better than turbs used to be 20 years ago. So there's things that I've made choices at the time, again, that I could do something rather than, I can't make oil paintings, therefore I'm not going to do anything. So, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, what are the benefits as an immigrant, and what are the challenges as an immigrant to establish yourself?
What are the benefits? Well, I can't talk for everyone. I don't know. I don't know what the I think benefit, I mean, everything is kind of both, right? It's both benefit and challenge. So, for example, after Trump was elected president, it was horrible, horrible feeling to realize what's coming and what's happening to this country. And it felt kind of powerless, and a lot of us immigrants did feel that way. And so we started this Foreigners Club and invited people for dinner from any country, and ended up doing that since 2016, so several years now. And so I guess I can speak for what I learned during those dinners, and that's one thing I feel like we have all in common is that you're never gonna see world from one point of view anymore. You can't. You're always holding it like this, and you always seeing it from somewhere else, and then you're seeing it from here. And that's also, so it's good that you have some, different vision, but it's also hard to hold those places that are dear to you. You always split. You always half somewhere else. Even for us that has been, people that live here their whole lives or big parts of their lives. Another thing I think we have in common that I realized, there were people in our group were from India, Panama, Israel, Iran, Italy, me, Czech Republic, you name it basically. And we realized that most of us, either ourselves or our families, have been through some really hard times. Like we have encountered, there wouldn't be a generation that missed something. Change of regime or some kind of persecution, or at least being part of demonstrations. I left for America right after '89, and I was part of the student movement in Velvet Revolution. I lived through it as a student on campus. So I feel like it's either that's something that most foreigners do have in common, that they have experienced having to go, demonstrate or having to escape from something. I don't know. It's just, yeah. I don't know. Is that a good answer?
So on the top of escaping from something or moving into something, this is sort of a multi-layered question, but what I really love about your work is, the use of lights and darks, people standing around staring into the unknown, as you called it, and an abyss. I mean, it almost looks like they're watching like an eclipse or something like that, or divers moving from surface level, from darkness into light, which is typically the opposite. The light's on the surface and you move down into the darkness. So with that in mind, in this piece in front of us, like there's the same device working here with the background being empty and leaving out information. So wherever you want to pick up on this, but like, when do you know like that you've created that unknown or that abyss, or like how much, like when do you know that this is finished? You said you just finished this one. I just finished.
It's a good question, and the one that I'm just emerged, like, it's a fist fight. It's not pretty. I mean, sometimes I get lucky. And I know, I'm thankful, when I get lucky. But this one was in works for a good couple of months. I'm not really used to a family member during that time. And there's a vague idea of what they're, I started with a dog, but the composition was different. And I knew that I needed something that suggests human presence, but no humans there, and some kind of landscape. So the wall was one thing, and none of this was an idea. Like, I'm talking about it as if it was clear. It wasn't. So it was just through it again. There was a rectangle that I knew, okay, that's a wall, and then there has to be a space. And that is enough for me to suggest that this animal inhabits Earth, where also humans are, but that I wanted to leave that open as far as what the impact of the humans are, but suggested by the elements in the space, in the landscape. And the feeling was always, you know, where I come from. Like, as long as I could, if I could advance the painting in a way that kept matching my feeling, then it wouldn't get erased. And then I would, work on it that way. Yeah.
So we're just going to have a little microphone party down here.
Okay.
So I was just wondering if you could speak to your choice. Well, you started out by showing these ceramics pieces that are attempting this kind of illusionistic quality. Your paintings, while they have a very representational quality in place, they're obviously not looking as this kind of to fool the eye. They don't have like a trompe l'oeil quality like the ceramics pieces. But seeing your work move, be it from ceramics into painting, I guess I'm wondering if you could just briefly talk about your choice of materials, your intuitive, like if it's an intuitive process, knowing when to reach for the ceramics. Like you showed those figurines from the soccer field, which are enchanting little objects. But I guess I'm wondering at what point you knew, okay, well now there's this extra step that needs to be taken, or did it feel like a natural progression from 3D, 2D? I'm just really curious about your choice of material and taking something out of the picture plane
into 2D, 3D. Yeah, that's a great question. Actually, intuitive, that's the word you used, and I would say that fits my work really well, and curious. So those two things, and so there's no grand plan in working. Actually, working in ceramics, I feel like I'm always curious about it, always have been. Like, I'm not one of those people that have been painting in oils their whole life. I've always dabbled in this and that and tried different things. I feel like for me, I mean, there are different people, but for me it helps to clarify my ideas. Sometimes I can get stuck in one media, but if I switch it even to prints, it allows me to resolve the things very different way. So, and then I can come back. So I use it as a tool. But also, like with ceramics, actually, the thing was just being, I've always done painting and drawing. I've never done any sculpture, ever. In school, nothing. And then I had a friend, Rumi Koshino, at the UW. She was in the CMA program there, and she said she was doing working with clay, and I became really curious about it. And one day she just came and she brought this block of porcelain and some tools, and she said, "This is how you do it." And I'm like, "Oh, cool." So I got into making, and I didn't show this work, but I have made like the ceramic, I don't know if it's still on my website, but ceramic underwear and other sculptural pieces that I was making for a few years, and interestingly enough, those are the first pieces that got shown in Seattle. So people thought I'm a ceramic artist, and then I went back to painting. It felt like a very natural progression because I was starting. Also, what I made out of clay was I made my own sketchbooks. So I was painting on them in the same way as I was using the paper ones, and I realized that's a lot of work, and I'm just making my own paper right now. So I went back to paper, and that was kind of a roundabout way to get back to the painting and to 2D. I feel like I don't see them. I love them all. I love the media. I love to play with things and see what they can do. I don't see them that differently. Like painting with an underglaze is super pleasurable on clay. So, yeah.
I can just project if you can hear me.
Okay.
I was wondering why you didn't choose to paint players in your...
Because I feel like that's always the attention, you know. I mean, there's always focus on the player. I always wanted to see, I guess my curiosity is the places where other people, they're right in front of you, but nobody's paying attention to it. Same with the laundry, like it was, it took kind of a change of perspective of me going from being really pissed at the kids and upset that, again, here we are, and to like turn it into something different, positive that I can use creatively. So it's more dealing with my own, how do you channel your anger in a positive way, or like Cézanne channeled his anxiety into great painting. So it's always that twist of like, okay, I can be really excited about something, or I can be irritated, but both ways can be used, in your work if you make something out of that. So that was more like I was really sick of being on the sidelines and turned it around, yeah. Mm-hmm.
I'd just love to hear more about the NEPO House.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I didn't include it into the lecture, but you guys, there's nepohouse.org or com. Well, anyway, you can find it. All the documentation is online and the images are there. That was a project that I started in our house in like 2009. And I don't know if you guys know or remember that 2008 was a big the crash, economic, and a lot of galleries or spaces in Seattle closed. So there was a lot of artists making great work, but there wasn't enough spaces to show it. And from my own perspective, I was just coming out of like spending, my days on the playground raising little kids, and I felt really isolated and really not part of any Seattle art scene. And I was trying to figure out how to connect with people, and I figured, I don't know, I was thinking like I can need to go looking for what's out there and what they're doing, which is good, or I can invite everybody in. And at that point, we remodeled our house and had no furniture. So it was great, like it's just white walls, and I invited people in and literally just bring artwork and let's hang it. And it turned into something, I feel like that wasn't something I could have planned. It was just a kind of confluence of my own needs with what was happening in society and the need of bigger, social kind of community. And so it grew. I had first year, the people just came. Yeah, they came and they were participating, and it was multimedia shows. There was anything from poetry reading to music to performances, film screenings, and visual art as well. The art was shown in all places in our house. I did 4 shows the first year, and it was like moving 4 times. It was kind of brutal because the artwork was everywhere, in my kids' rooms, in the bathroom, and yeah. So after that 1 year, my family kind of, I offered to buy a TV, but they're like, that's not enough of a payback for moving 4 times a year. So so we kind of did a compromise and offered shows just in our front room, and that was called Little Treats, and that was usually just a small group or solo show that artists would bring their work, but they would also cook for the people that came to visit. So Little Treats, they made treats. And that usually made artists really happy because they don't want to stand around. They could be hiding in the kitchen and cooking. Then after that, it was still a lot in one little house because by then our audience was growing, so I just decided to kick everybody out, literally on the street, and we brainstormed about what could this thing be, and we decided that it would be a run and it was somehow like we wanted to be active artists doing something in the world. So to do anything around, you have to apply for special permit. The city of Seattle, we send in our paperwork, it came promptly back saying, nope, you can't do anything but run. So we're like, oh, we're done. We can't do, we can't do it. They say you can do it in the park. I'm like, everybody does everything in the park. We want to be out there in the streets. And then we just, almost as a joke, decided to just change the name, NEPO 5K Don't Run. And we got the stamp back. So we weren't running, but we did place artwork in the streets, and that happened for 5 years in a row, and we would have up to 60 to 80 projects, and it all happened. They came up in one day, and it was kind of this huge event where over 1,000 people would come and walk through the streets and view the work. So, that was kind of 5 years seemed like a good time. It was a massive event that lasted one day and took 9 months of planning, and there was 4 of us, and we had to raise money, and it was great though. So anyway, look up if you're interested. You can email me too. Mm-hmm.
With the diving work, you said when you got to the bottom with the series,
Mm-hmm.
I just know sometimes art can take us to those really vulnerable, like dark places.
Mm-hmm.
For yourself and your journey, did you find it necessary to take a break from making art and filling your cup in a different way, or did you just continue to make art in a different way in order to build that back up again?
I think I decided to just go through it, but change the storyline. So I feel like when I got to a place where it was affecting me emotionally in a way, I mean, it wasn't the art affecting me. I was also, that's just, life is that way. Something happened that I learned about during the time I was making it. So I don't know if life made the art or the art is like it's kind of double. There was nothing said before, so I kind of followed certain developments both internally and externally, and then I feel like there was I needed to have the story had to continue for me to lead me back up. So that was my choice, was to make it through images, keep going.
I have a quick question about art history and who you look at, and whether you feel like growing up in Czech Republic influenced you with any sort of Eastern Bloc Leipzig painters, or was that the training being academic, was that specific to where you grew up, and do you think it speaks to the way you paint and make work?
Well, I think undeniably there is probably you can discern European painterly tradition in my work, but I don't know if my training was, it started with I think it's almost everywhere, or it used to be like the bust of Socrates or something. Just like drawing this bust, this, plaster bust. But other things. In terms of my influences, I think I've been, for sure, I think there is that coming from there, and I think we're all influenced by where we grow up and how. I feel like I've been in this country though so long. It's been bigger half of my life now, that it probably has as much impact. And me developing as an artist, I feel like I would probably be a different place if I stayed there. So yes and no, there's impact, but I was just thinking the other day, what are the earliest times I can remember painting, in a museum or impact by any visual art. And it was, interestingly enough, the sailor painting by Henri Rousseau. And I don't know how old I was, but probably not very old, because to this day I remember fascination. I don't know if you know the painting, but it's a big image of a person, a sailor in the middle, and then he must have decided his legs are too long, so he shortened them. But it's very obvious where the longer legs were. And I remember looking at it, like, I think it dawned on me maybe first time, this is what painting is, you know? So that had an impact. Other than that, I really admire, like, the painters I look to now is Noah Davis or Henry Taylor, probably favorites, and Peter Doig. I think you can, yeah, there's people that I definitely look at and I'm probably influenced by, yeah.
Oh, hello. First of all, I just wanted to say that I like your work so much.
Thank you.
It's just beautiful. And I wanted to ask you about, I'm kind of familiar with like a school in Eastern Europe, art school, because I kind of went through this thing. And I'm interested, like when you studied in New York art school, what is the different like tools for learning was like compared to in Czech Republic, where you've been there? Like, what is the difference between there and here, and how they teaching the process?
Okay, that's a good question. I feel like, just to say up front, I feel like my art education was super schizophrenic. Like, anyway, I'll explain that. So in Czech Republic, I actually didn't go to art school. I went to architecture school to start with because I grew up in family of two architects, and they thought I can draw, so for sure I'll be an architect. That took, 1 year in the college, and that was clear I'm not gonna be one because I left out staircase to the second floor in my plans, but they looked great. So, so there was more of a, but even architecture school or the school that I would go to like after school, it was more, like just learn drawing, as I mentioned, some models, some busts, some just draw and draw and draw, and like I had my family members sitting for me and kept doing that. I also had a great teacher in elementary school who would introduce Paul Klee and Bauhaus, and that was huge in terms of color and learning about that. I thought that was probably a big impact. And then when I came to New York, I went to New York Studio School, which was focused on practice. So you were expected to be 8 hours a day in a studio and basically work on your drawing and painting. They had this great program that was called Drawing Marathon, the 2 weeks of every beginning of school year, and we would make drawings, at least 8 hours a day, and they were big, 4-foot drawings. So they were super physical and just like they get us working. So that was a really big plus. And I had some really great visiting professors there. I got my own studio for a moment, and then, but there was something missing that I felt like I wasn't really introduced to as much to ideas and what, like it felt like, okay, so we're leaving out a huge part of the art. This was early 90s, but that just like I knew the conceptual ideas and art history and all that. I felt like I wasn't really taught, and I went briefly to Hunter College, and I was one of those students. I was new. I was on my own, new country, new language, and honestly not the great. I mean, my studies didn't make great sense, like looking back, I took like random medieval sarcophagus relief carvings, and but anyway, I really enjoyed that. So there were some parts that felt, I took lithography, I took photography, so all of a sudden I felt like I was getting a little more, I was getting a little more of what I wasn't getting if I was just focused on painting and drawing and nothing else. So I kind of dabbled in other media, learned a little bit about art history, but ultimately that wasn't, I I felt there was lacking the other part, because there were a lot of classes that I would show up and there would be full class the first day, and then I'll be in the studio, me or two people with the instructor, and then the last, there was people would show up to get their credits on the last week. So there was something missing there in terms of like how rigorous the studies were, I thought, at the time. So I'm teaching right now at Gage Academy, and I'm trying to connect those two things together. Practice with how do you develop your own work and your own ideas, and how do you learn about what has happened in the last 100 years and why we are here at this point, why there's so many choices. So I try to connect those two things together. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
One last question. Sitting on the edge of your seat, you want to ask if you're afraid. This is your chance.
There's someone there.
Hello. Well, thank you. I was just curious because a lot of your paintings seem to be very like large and big, and like why the scale of your paintings? Like why the scale of your pieces, and what does that say about your art?
Good question. I would say that it is true, I make big works, but I also make tiny works, so it's almost like dabble in both those, because the prints are only, this small. 11 by 15, the diverse. But yeah, the big pieces, I love being physical when I'm in my studio. So sometimes it's like this thing, I feel like your mark making usually shows the energy that you bring in as an artist, or the mood. It's part of the feeling of the work, and sometimes I feel in the mood just sitting down and drawing small, but sometimes I really want to have that full body experience, and I feel like I need to change the scale in order to get that energy expressed that I feel. So I think it fluctuates based on that, and there's a different kind of mark and approach to things when you're with the bigger scale. I feel like I don't set up particularly to just make big paintings. They usually grow out of something. If like the prints, I would make them so many times that I was like, let's grab that canvas, I want to jump in, I really want to see what happens, how can I make that painting. So it's not as I feel like they grow out of the work that happens on a maybe smaller scale. Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.